So there we were, walking through the fucking desert on some low paying job that Carrie and Company HQ had contracted us out to do for some locals. All we had to do was walk out to some stupid pre-war rock quarry and deal with some feral ghouls that the nearby town was too scared or lazy to deal with themselves. So they shelled out some caps to HQ and we got sent to do clean up. Pretty much all of us thought it sounded like bitch work except Jeb. But I suppose I'd better tell you about a little crew of misfits before I continue. First there is Stubbs, a tribal warrior who left his village upon seeing a firearm for the first time during a raider attack. That day he became obsessed with explosives and the loudest firearms for the sole reason that he believes their use appeases his tribe's god of thunder, Kurak. Unfortunately he doesn't really understand any of the science behind them outside of more powder means better boom. His favored weapon is a crudely made and stupidly heavy, side-by-side shotgun he dubbed Kurak's Hammer Mark II, that he loads with custom shot shells that use dangerous amounts of gunpowder. The reason he calls it the Mark II is because the Mark I blow off his left hand covered his face in shrapnel scars. This is also why everyone calls him Stubbs. Second we have Fidget, the squad's tech guy and creator of the Murderlator. Went into mercenary work to afford more parts for his killer robot. Makes everyone feel kind of gross when he starts talking about it. Usually spends more time tinkering with the damn thing than doing actual mercenary work. Has made it to where the Murderlator responds to his vocal commands and can control it with a modified Pip-Boy 2000, so he doesn't need to get his hands dirty in combat. If Fidget is the brains, Murderlator is the brawn. Thirdly the Murderlator, Fidget's pride and joy. This death machine is built of scrap and old sentry bot parts and is armed with a 5mm CZ53 minigun, a homemade flamethrower and a back-mounted hydraulic catapult that throws pipe bombs. For melee combat, Fidget has welded steel spikes to its arms and shoulders and will have it drive full speed into anything squishy and not worth wasting ammo on. Everyone is pretty sure Fidget has tried to fuck it before, and we just don't know what to say about that, so we just let it go. Murderlator doesn't have a voice modulator, so it can't talk, but we are pretty sure it would beg for help if it could. Then there is Jeb, a decrepit old man who claims he was a captain in the now defunct enclave. He is literally so old that he can barely move on his own and relies completely on his equally as old X-01 power armor whenever he is in combat. Like Jeb, the armor is not in the best condition and is little more than the internal frame covered in cannibalized armor parts from whatever he found rusting in the wasteland. At some point in time Jeb lost the helmet to his armor and replaced it with a simple rebar cage covered in rusty barbed wire. Most people would think he was just a raider boss if it wasn't for his enclave officer's cap and the big E symbol he painted on the chest. When asked why such an old man wanted to join a mercenary company he simply replied, to kill every last fucking mutant in America. Armed with a H&K L30 Gatling laser and an industrial saw mounted to his left gauntlet, Jeb is a force of nature despite his age. Now on to Cash, an ex-raider who left his life of violent murder behind for a life of violent murder, but with more profit. Cash loves melee combat and is quick to dive in with his trusty machete and waylay his enemies. He ignores the better protection of heavier armor in favor of speed and wears old sports equipment like football pads and a catcher's mask. Despite his propensity for physical combat he carries a 10mm submachine gun he calls Dottie. Cash has a surprisingly solid knowledge in basic field medicine. This is mostly due to his past use of chems and having to patch up his old raider buddies. Nobody actually trusts him with this task though, because 90% of the time he will just force Jet down your throat and kick you back into the action. And last but not least, there is Marty. Once an NCR Ranger, Marty was dishonorably discharged and became a wanted man when he shot and killed a man with connections to the new California Republic government in a small southwestern town. To the NCR, Marty is a soldier gone rogue who murdered a man in cold blood. To the people of that small town, he is a hero who killed a vicious criminal, a crack shot with his .44 Magnum. He is equally dangerous with his R91 5mm assault rifle. Marty is popular amongst the other mercs despite his strictness, because he makes sure everyone gets their fair share of the profit and loot. Because of this he is the de facto leader of the group despite Jeb's grumblings about rank. Despite how ragtag our group may sound, we had all worked together on some jobs in the past. and almost every single one was more exciting than this steaming pile of Brahmin shit that HQ was making us deal with. At least that's what we thought at first. So as I was saying, here we are walking through the fucking desert. It's hot, it's dry, and Fidget has been bitching the entire time about how tired he is despite riding on the Murderator's back instead of walking like the rest of the group. We had been on the move for the better part of the day and the sun was finally starting to go down. Marty called for us to stop and make camp for the night. Fidget let out an audible ugh finally, which gained him a scornful glare from Jeb, prompting the little nerd to hide behind Murderator. Once our camp had been set up, Marty made everyone draw lots to see who had first watch. Fidget felt obligated to point out that Murderator was a sentry bot and could keep watch, so none of them had to lose any sleep. Jeb replied to this by telling Fidget that he could just crush his head and burn his fuck bot if he insisted on bitching about watch duty. This of course started a large argument between the two, with Fidget threatening to turn off the friendly fire functions on Murderator and Jeb saying he would make Fidget's dream come true and shove that damn robot up his ass. Cash and Stubbs started taking bets on who would win, while Marty broke it up lest Jeb and Fidget start a firefight in the middle of camp and kill us all. After the excitement had died down, it was decided Fidget would be on first watch, since he had complained all day despite not doing any walking. Marty warned Fidget about letting Murderator do his job for him while he slept, threatening to feed him to coyotes if he caught him. Fidget grumbled something in reply as he walked away from the group with Murderator beside him. Stubbs was pretty sure he saw Fidget rubbing the robot's backside and shuddered. After eating some tons of cram, Marty checked their map with Jeb, while Stubbs and Cash played Caravan using their rations for wagers. Marty had banned the two from gambling with anything else, since Stubbs' ammo couldn't be trusted, and Cash liked to bet with questionable batches of jet. Once the sun was just about set, the four of them started getting ready to sleep. Marty, Stubbs and Cash laid out their bedrolls and Jeb, who was decrepit due to his age and never took off his power armor while on a mission, just started snoring standing straight up. A few quiet hours passed in the night, but Marty couldn't sleep. He often tossed and turned when out on a job, but it was worse when he was in the open wasteland. Didn't like being this exposed. Marty decided if he couldn't sleep he'd go relieve Fidget early and let the nerd sleep. Getting up quietly so as not to wake the others, he grabbed his 44 and slung his R91. As Marty walked up to where Fidget was standing, he could see in the starlight that Fidget was leaning against the Murderator and whispering to it, with an arm half around the machine's torso. When Marty said Fidget's name, the little guy jumped in terror and whirled around with a .32 pistol pointed at Marty's head. Fidget lowered his gun when he realized it was Marty and started stuttering about how it's not what it looks like. And I was just checking his servos. Marty opted to ignore this weirdness and told Fidget to go to bed. The blushing Fidget rushed past the ex-ranger looking down at the ground with the Murderator in tow. Before getting to a spot by the others, Fidget's Pip-Boy beeped and the Murderator turned sharply to the right with its weapons at the ready. Marty yelled for the alarm, and Fidget ducked behind the Murderator, just as a hail of bullets ripped into the campsite. Cash and Stubbs, who were still bleary-eyed from sleep, jumped awake at the sound of the gunfire and took cover behind the still sleeping Jeb. Marty fired a few bursts from his A91 in the direction of the muzzle flashes as he dashed behind the Murderator with Fidget. Bullets ricocheted off the sentry bot and the back of Jeb's armor and peppered the sandy soil around them. Despite the noise of gunfire and Marty barking orders to return fire, Jeb was still snoring away, while Cash was mag dumping wildly into the shadows and Stubbs was hitting Jeb's armor with the butt of his shotgun trying to wake the old man. Marty fired a flare into the air and ordered Fidget to have the Murderator return fire with its minigun before they were flanked. After firing a few rounds with his pistol and bitching about how 5mm doesn't grow on trees, Fidget begrudgingly hit some buttons on his Pip-Boy and the sentry bot's minigun roared into life as Marty's flare illuminated the wastes. A nearly solid line of tracers sprayed into the night, and in the eerie glow of the flare, the party could see a large number of raiders scattering in all directions and ducking behind rocks trying to avoid the sentry bot's aim. Those that didn't were quickly shot down, one of which was cut clean in half by the Murderator's minigun, while another lost the majority of his skull from an overpowered blast courtesy of Stubbs' shotgun. Marty managed to pop 3 raiders in the back of the head with his rifle as they were running away, but had to stop shooting to tackle Cash, who had taken a hit of Jet and ran out of cover with his machete. The fight was over almost as soon as it had started. As the Murderator's minigun whined to a halt and the ringing in everyone's ears subsided, Marty could see in the waning light of the flare the dark outlines of raiders running off into the night. When Marty was sure they were gone, and that Cash wasn't gonna chase them down like an idiot, Marty ordered everyone to fan out and look for loot and survivors, while leaving Murderator behind to watch Jeb, who was still snoring, much to the chagrin of Fidget, who was forced to come with the group and leave his pet robot behind. Their search mostly found shredded corpses and destroyed gear, compliments of the minigun. Stubbs spent the majority of the time pocketing shotgun shells and any unused cartridges he could cannibalize for powder, while Cash looked for more chems. The damage to the corpses made it hard to make an accurate count, but after a few minutes of debate, the party opted to just throw all the torsos they could find into a big meat pile. With this macabre method, they came to a count of 19 dead. Possibly 18, since they couldn't be sure if 2 bloody chunks of meat were from the same raider. Fidget was not happy, as he saw this low kill count as a huge waste of Murderator's ammo, and insisted that Marty compensate him for it. Marty told him to shove it, and gave the order to return to camp. On their way back, Fidget saw a shambling figure moving slowly away from them, dragging its leg limply in the sand. Fidget yelled and pointed, and Stubbs raised his shotgun with a giggle of delight. Marty put his hand on top of Stubbs's shotgun, and forced it down, shaking his head no. "Cash," said Marty. "Yeah boss," replied Cash. "Fetch." With another hit of Jet and a loud whoop, Cash sprinted after the limping figure. The wounded raider, who noticed the drug-maddened psychopath on his tail, tried in vain to hop away faster, but was ultimately tackled hard to the ground. He tried hard to get away, but after receiving multiple painful headbutts from Cash, the raider pulled a knife and thrust it at Cash's neck. He was rewarded for this by having his arm captured and snapped at the elbow by the hyper-aggressive Merc. With a scream, the raider went limp and Cash lashed his arms to his sides with rope and dragged the whimpering man back to camp. The rest of the group had gathered near the still sleeping Jeb as Cash returned with his prize. Grinning ear to ear, Cash threw the man hard to the ground in front of Marty, who began to interrogate him for information on his gang. The raider could only manage some whimpers and groans of pain before he passed out. Marty ordered Cash to patch up the raider's wounds and give him a stim pack. Cash mumbled about wasting chems, but did as he was told. After putting the raider's arm in a sling, patching up his gunshot wound, and shooting him up with a stim pack, the group waited for him to wake up. Cash offered to give him some Jet, but everyone quickly shot that down. Meanwhile, Fidget, Murderator and Stubbs kept a lookout in case the raiders came back, while Cash and Marty waited for their captive to come around. Suddenly, without warning, they heard Jeb scream "raiders," and a sickening crunch as his power armored boot crushed in the chest of their captive. "What the fuck, Jeb? What the actual fuck?" screamed Cash as Marty groaned and put his hands over his face in defeat. "The fuck is your problem, Cash?" replied Jeb. "Marty, snap out of it. I think there might be more nearby."